to weave the skein. Yvraine had called upon old debts from her former life as the Corsair Amharoc, and in doing so aided Iyanden. With that, the Reborn was vindicated in the eyes of the Craftworld Seers and were allowed to fight as one against the creatures invading the world ship. The Ynnead banished not only swathes of plague demons, but also the infections they spread. All forms of life are hastened to their end when Ynnead's ire is raised, even microbes. Prince Yriel's body was quarantined after its recovery, after the grisly fate of the Seers of Craftworld Lugganath, who unwisely projected the souls into Nurgle's garden. All Eldar have feared the plague god's gifts. The resinous shell that contained Yriel was broken open by wraith constructs in the Barren Chamber, a sealed oval room isolated from the wider infinity circuit by the Spiritseer's art. That caution was well exercised. The prince's corpse yielded a cloud of plague spores that would have turned living, breathing Eldar to walking hotbeds of contagion. News of the corpse's infection was psychically conveyed to a Spiritseer, and from there to Ynnead. Yvraine was soon escorted to the antechamber outside Yriel's resting place. She called out to the ghost warriors inside, bidding them retreat into the airlock-style vestibule on the far side of the chamber, and then drew her blade. Holding it aloft, she summoned forth the spirit magic in her soul and, by molding the necromantic energies with her psyche, sent waves of lethal energy into the chamber beyond. Though they had no effect on Yriel, by this point he was beyond harm. They killed every single spore and microorganism that Garagugulgor's filthy curse had unleashed upon the craftworld. It was then that a true miracle took place. Yvraine ran 3 FNGERs down the length of the Barren Chamber's doors, and they opened soundlessly before her. 2 of her Iyanden wraith blade escort crossed the curving blades to bar her passage to the sacred space, but Ynnead waved them aside. Yvraine sketched a curtsy to her ally before striding inside with a contented smile on her features. She took up the spear of twilight, reversed it in her grip, and plunged it into Yriel's chest. With a great heaving exhalation, the Corsair Prince of Iyanden suddenly sat bolt upright. His paladesh was restored to a vigor it had not seen since before he took up his fabled spear. The blade, having returned the stolen life force it had siphoned from its wielder over the cycles, turned to quicksilver in Yvraine's grip. It took a new shape, revealing its true form as the 5th of the chronoswords. She passed it back to Yriel, and in his grip it became a spear once more. The pirate prince stood unsteadily, then straightened to his full height, a new power glowing from his eyes. Prince Yriel of Iyanden had been reborn. Soon, he would be far from alone. The Hall of Truths was so massive that mist gathered under its vast dome. The voices of Iyanden's greatest heroes, living and dead, echoed from the frozen waterfalls of wraithbone that stretched from floor to ceiling. Some of those present were still mortals, their lifespan measured in mere Terran centuries. Others had served the craftworld for standard millennia, the statuesque war forms towering over the Eldar that gave them a reason to fight on beyond the gates of mortality. "Take heed, children of Asuryan," said Farsi Iyanden, "for this is a day of fates." There was a murmur amongst the assemblage. With the initiation phrase spoken, the audience would have to begin, despite Yvraine and Iyanden still absent. "We must act," said Eldrad Ulthron. "We must find a way to change the fate of the galaxy." Silence stretched out until Denton gestured to continue. "The red moon rises, for the great enemy is ascendant," continued Eldrad. "The veil is torn in 1,000 new places each night. We cannot prevail alone. Then who would you use as sword and shield alike?" said Silandri Veilwalker, one of the high-ranking Harlequins in attendance. "The tower's still too young, the orcs too unpredictable, and the Tyranids out of the question." Humans are too easily corrupted, this we know. They walk the same path we once followed, blindly walking into the abyss. Not with faith, said Dental, nodding. With faith, they still have power. And who can give that to them? Ask the looming presence of the Wraith Knight Soulseeker piloted by Ethan's son Strider. Not their corpse god. His time is over. There was a slamming impact as the doors at the end of the hall were hung open. No, said Yvraine as she strode in, Iyanden Arian at her side and a shadowed figure in their wake. They must have a new leader. Only then will they serve our interests. Impossible, said the Corsair Lord Araclio. They are entrenched. They worship the past, said Iyanden. If we raise a hero that reminds them of it, they will follow him. Do we not also cling to our myths, finding comfort in the glories of yesteryear? She is right, said Eldrad, and I have already found a way through the skein to that end, and a leader the humans will follow like sheep. The Fulcrum of Destiny is the moon of Clasis, that we once called Ulthanash's Rest. You do not steer our course, Ulthwain, said Dentaln. We need not the guidance of the damned, but the counsel of our own kin. The uncomfortable silence was broken by Prince Yriel, stepping from the shadows to the incredulity of all present. As one, the wraith constructs kneeled the ground shivering beneath. We shall give the humans a demigod, said Yriel, his tone as chill as if coming from the other side of the grave. A king reborn, with a deathly blade. And the hosts of Iyanden shall go with us. The harrowing odyssey of Yvraine and the Reborn had been the subject of much interest in the cabal of the Black Heart. The Supreme Overlord Asdrubaelvek had far more pressing matters to attend to. The Camorra was racked by the most severe of disjunctions and his eons-old power base was literally falling apart. Yet he could not shake the desire for vengeance upon the upstart gladiatrix that had triggered this turbulent uprising that night in the Crucible arena, and causing division amongst the Camorrites. A sentiment shared by a great many of the Heman-Cullia who had long considered themselves the true masters of Dark Eldar society. The disjunction of Camorra was an eventuality Vect had long planned for. He was a past master at ensuring that when misfortune befell the Dark Eldar, his rival suffered the worst. Often it transpired that it was Vec's hidden hand behind the disaster in the first place. Though he implied to his servants that he had deliberately triggered the cataclysm to relieve his immortal ennui, Vect was secretly livid that his personal fiefdom had been defiled, and his contingency plans forced into sudden reality. Whilst his rivals scrambled to salvage the remnants of their once glorious holdings amidst the spreading warpquake, Vect was already well established elsewhere, populating the ruins of ancient port cities and turning them into sprawling fortresses. He offered safe haven to those who sought his protection, at a price, of course, and prepared for his long campaign of counterattack. Meanwhile, the cataclysm of the Dark City occurred in a series of chain reactions. The underground river Kides burst its banks as a slough of Nurgle demons opted into its acrid reaches, surging into the streets above to trigger waves of necrotizing plague. With the mid-spires largely unguarded, Zinchian sky sharks and the fiery chariots of demon sorcerers roared into the skies, spiraling as they clashed with the murder packs that populate Camorra's starscrapers. When the demons of Khorne poured through empty streets to invade the sprawl of Sekmegra, the most nefarious, hardened mercenaries and pirates of the galaxy united as a single army in the face of swarming bloodletters and rampaging greater demons. The hordes of Slaanesh, beside themselves with ecstasy, sated themselves with orgies of violence unbound as they massacred Camorride cabal spire by spire. That immense and complex Dark Eldar metropolis had power enough to swallow even a major demon incursion and cauterize the areas deemed irretrievable, but it was far too fractious a domain for a unified defense. Many of the Dark City's Archons tried to slay their rivals under the pretense of fighting back the demon hordes, their actions adding to the mayhem. Skirmishes and gang wars broke out in the streets in an escalating measure, for this time there was no cabal of the Black Heart to bring the hyperdimensional city to bloody order. Like a palace made of dominoes given a single push, Camorra suffered a chain reaction of disasters. Around the Crucible, the escaped Tyranids that would once have been put down with relative ease carved a red path through the domains of the witch cults. Archon Scythrak counterattacked after a vicious but costly coup staged against the Lords of the Iron Thorn was beheaded by Kara Druak the Decapitator, one of the living shadows known as mandrakes. With this singular and grisly kill, the Decapitator finally claimed the last perfect skull he needed for his dark work. Flaying it and licking his trophy clean, he used it to complete the underground ritual he had been obsessively fashioning from the stolen heads of his prey over the last 8 Terran millennia. The gaze of 1,000 perfect skulls met in the middle of his lair and bored a hole in the wall between worlds, opening a gateway to the midnight dimension of the mandrakes. A morass of shadowy assassins and tenebrous monsters spilled like an inkyude through the streets, and slew every soul within a dozen Terran miles. In the space of a single night, that region became the Shadow Kingdom of the Decapitator, long-lost monarch of the mandrakes. His was a new reign of terror, his throne set within a sea of living shadow that consumed even the demon invaders that strayed within its grasp. On the third night, that shadow army combined its strength with the Eshi hordes of the Heman-Cully covens. Endless menageries of twisted Esh things and shadow demons surged up from the Dark City's underworld, and the mayhem of the demon incursion begins to lose momentum. The cabals and witch cults regroup somewhat, using their knowledge of the Dark City to fight back against the warp-born invaders. As the stolen Dark Suns burned overhead, Camorra's fate hung in the balance. In Vect's presence, the topic of the disjunction's course was already taboo. The Supreme Overlord had already claimed he had Yvraine in his power, and that he and his Heman-Killis allies were painstakingly extracting every ounce of the power she had shown in the Crucible. Though there had been no proof of it, none were foolish enough to call him a liar to his face. Vect had publicly tortured the steersmen and Corsair warriors Yvraine had abandoned in her IGHT from the city, but of the gladiatrix herself, there was no sign. Rumors were circulating that Vect's claim was hollow, and his rivals, his former paramour, Lady Meleys of the Poison Tongue, foremost amongst them, were doing everything in their power to ensure that Vect's authority and dominance were undermined. In secret, Vect was sparing no expense in the search for Yvraine, and the Heman-Cully ancient Urian Rakath's prophets of Flesh Coven were pulling every string they could in order to track down the Ynnead. Without the aid of their Harlequin allies, the Ynnead would likely already be captured, but for now, they had slipped the net. To Rakath, the rumors of soul magic were both intoxicating and horrifying. They hinted at a prize worth any cost to the nigh-immortal Coven Lords, whilst also representing a manner of death that even a Heman-Killis ancient would not be able to escape. Word had already reached the master Ashcrafters of the embodiment of Ynnead that had fought the Coven sent to Belial IV. Upon their return to Camorra, the Heman-Cully had ascertained that their worst fears were true. The slain fellows had been entirely reduced to dust by the powerful revenant magic of the Incarn. Every Vat clone, phylactery hidden remnant and secret skin sample had been desiccated to nothingness. Somewhere out there was the power to wield both inescapable deaths and life eternal. And they wanted to claim it like nothing before. War in the Labyrinth. With the galactic cataclysm unfolding around them, the Ynnead made haste to the ghost halls as soon as the Iyanden Seer Council had reached its decision. Using her influence over the spirits of the dead, Yvraine worked every available moment to transfer the consciousness of ancient heroes from the Iyanden infinity circuit directly into the wraithbone bodies they had previously only controlled via the use of spirit stones. These ghost warriors were not trapped in a waking dream, but given new life by Yvraine and her kin, able to see, feel and hear the material world around them with all the clarity they had possessed as mortals. Though mute, the gratitude was obvious in their deference. The stiffness and uncertainty of the typical wraith construct were replaced by a UID grace as the statuesque spirit warriors adjusted to their new forms. Before long, these newly realized ghost warriors had taken up the artifacts and heraldry of their mortal incarnations. They were truly reborn. With the senses singing and the thirst for vengeance undiminished, the ghost warriors of Iyanden were more formidable than ever. With the senses singing and the thirst for vengeance undiminished, the ghost warriors of Iyanden were more formidable than ever. In conjunction with Yriel and her Spiritseer brethren, the High Priestess of Ynnead brought entire ghost halls to full wakefulness. The wraithbone constructs were filled with a purpose. They felt the presence of Ynnead calling them to war, for if any could command them from beyond the veil, it was the god of the dead. Within a matter of solar days, the Ynari made for the webway once more. This time they went with not only elements of the Beeltani Swordwind, ghostly emissaries from Altansar and strike forces from the craft worlds amongst their ranks, but also with a mighty host of reborn ghost warriors. Many of the Iyandeni traditionalists objected vociferously to what they saw as a crippling blow to the world ship's defenses, but the newly realized constructs would not listen to even the most compelling argument, and would not allow themselves to be stopped. Few had the nerve to stand before the ancient heroes of the Eldar race and tell them to stand down in the name of passivity and caution. The future of their entire species was at stake, and the dead would do everything in their power to ensure that their living brethren were beyond the reach of she who thirsts. From the sternmost portal of Iyanden, the swollen ranks of the reborn made for the depths of the webway once more. To use those esoteric pathways often carries a cost. Even with the harlequins of the Mask of the Midnight Sorrow to guide them, the Ynari found their progress painfully slow. Fractal complexities haunted the peripheral vision, surreal dreams assailed their minds, and false turns confounded them every night. Half real, half of the warp, that twilight labyrinth dimension was in places as much the domain of the dark gods as that of the Eldar, or rather the old ones that had come before them. The chaos-tainted wilderness of the webway, long abandoned even by the harlequins, had become the stalking grounds of Ahriman, arch-sorcerer of the Thousand Suns Legion. A devotee of Tzeentch, Ahriman had once been a mystical warrior of the Imperium, noble and just. In the millennia-long search to save his cursed legion, he walked such dark paths he became consumed by ambition and revenge. Ahriman's former master, the demon Primarch Magnus the Red, had wrought a great doom for the Space Wolves chapter of Astartes, those executioners that had hounded his legion to near extinction at the dawn of the Horus heresy 10,000 standard years before. In doing so he had not only brought utter devastation to the Fenris system but also used the tremendous magical forces he had unleashed to force his own power base, the demon world known as the Planet of the Sorcerers, through the veil between the warp and real space. That cataclysmic act of metaphysical manipulation had seen a dozen new warp storms spiral into being across the galaxy. Empowered, the Legion of the Thousand Suns had risen again in power and prominence. The Thousand Suns were a force like no other. In the name of enlightenment, they had dabbled with the energies of the warp so deeply that a ore in the transhuman gene seed had mutated out of control, with some of their number turned into Ashi monsters called Chaos Spawn who were robbed of all sanity. Ahriman had cast a great spell, the Rubric, to preserve what was left of his fellows, but in doing so had been too successful. He had turned his kin from mutable ash to unliving dust sealed inside baroque suits of ancient power armor. He had turned his kin from mutable ash to unliving dust sealed inside baroque suits of ancient power armor. Since that day, the arch-sorcerer had sought a way to rescue his fellows from the deathly and soulless half-life. He had needed little spurring to seek out the Ynnari. In the travails within the webway, the Reborn had come to the notice of many a baleful eye. Through the whispered cant of demons, word had reached Ahriman of a new force in the galaxy that could defy death, and even resurrect those whose spirits still lingered. With all haste, he gathered his demonic servants and sent him into the twilight between worlds to serve as his eyes and ears. Here was a chance to save his legion in earnest and possibly restore them body and soul. He had sent several thrall bands of his servants alongside Abaddon the Despoiler's Black Legion to the Ice Moon places in the besieged Cadia system, for he had foreseen that planet as a nexus of fate in the greater schemes of Tzeentch. Yet that was a distraction from his own self-imposed mission, a task he still considered selfless, but which was more truthfully yet another quest for personal power and vindication entwined. If his agents in the webway spoke even a whisper of possible redemption for his legion, he would snatch it up with both hands. Then, once he had wrung the Ynnari's secrets from their pain-racked bodies, he would use their power over life and death as he saw fit. When they had first ventured into the webway from Camorra, the relatively small size of the Ynnari expedition had lent him stealth. They had evaded the notice of Ahriman's diminutive spies, for the webway is impossibly convoluted and beyond the ken of all but Sigarash, the laughing god himself. Yet bolstered by warriors from Bealtan, Ulthwé, Iyanden, Altansar, and several other craft worlds that had been drawn to the banner during the travels, the Ynnari had become a force that could no longer hide. Yet bolstered by warriors from Bealtan, Ulthwé, Iyanden, Altansar, and several other craft worlds that had been drawn to the banner during the travels, the Ynnari had become a force that could no longer hide. Ahriman, having stolen passages of the fabled tome Labyrinthus from the Black Library and deciphered their mind-bending secrets, knew many of those shattered spars that had been claimed by chaos. He had even learned to scry regions of the webway at will, the better to catch his prey unawares. The sorcerer waited for his moment to strike with the attentiveness of a serpent. 10 millennia of pursuing his arcane agendas had given him terrible patience. When the Ynnari strayed into the Psychodelta, a many-tunneled region where the walls of the webway were thin, the Chaos Sorcerer conducted a great ritual of translocation, sacrificing 999 captives to the glory of Tzeentch. When the Ynnari strayed into the Psychodelta, a many-tunneled region where the walls of the webway were thin, the Chaos Sorcerer conducted a great ritual of translocation, sacrificing 999 captives to the glory of Tzeentch. The Changer of the Ways was pleased, and a few moments later Ahriman burst from the ether to attack the Ynnari with a host of thousand suns and gibbering demons at his back. The battle that ensued scorched the still air of the webway delta. It was a pyrotechnic display of raw Tzeentchian magic pitted against the expert skill and spiritual conjurations of the Reborn. Initially, the battle was fought on a narrow frontage, every Thousand Suns thrall band and demonic host pushing with relentless, tireless strength into the ranks of the Ynnari. The Eldar reacted instinctively, owing and darting around every push and thrust with the expertise of master duelists. Then, as the Ynnari were forced to give ground by the sheer power and suddenness of the Chaos Assault, the battle led back to the neck of that section of the webway, spreading into every one of the contributory capillaries of the Psychodelta. Before long, a half-dozen battles were being fought in parallel or in tunnels one atop another, each force giving everything it had to break past the other, and in doing so, win a critical advantage by attacking two fronts in the neighboring engagement. High on a crystal bridge that seemed open to the void of space, a host of Iyyanden's guardians and ghost warriors were led into battle by the Wraith Knight Soulseeker. A phalanx of Thousand Suns Chaos Terminators barred the path across the apex of the bridge, but the wraith-led host slowed not at the sight. Where they had once moved in ponderous strides, the blank-helmed constructs now ran with the easy grace of the living Eldar that loped behind them, the complex warp-tech guns held tightly to the broad chests. Guardian heavy weapon platforms sent a steady hail of shuriken cannon fire into the ornately armored Terminators, the shredding discs shattering or ricocheting from ensorcelled ceramite without visible effect. The Scarab cult returned fire, the combi bolters stitching thunderous explosions across the oncoming Eldar constructs, but in turn, did little more than scorching their inviolable forms. The Thousand Suns swiftly switched targets, picking out the Guardians behind with uncanny marksmanship to take a gory toll. The sorcerers in their midst sent vivid helixes of light shooting out to trap the Wraithguard in cages of azure luminescence. These then contracted to slice through Wraithbone as if it were raw meat until only chunks of ivory anatomy were left behind. Those Terminators armed with rotary assault cannons and Hellfire missile racks poured in enough warp-cursed firepower to dismember two of the leading Ghost Warriors. The irresistible force of the Thousand Suns' firepower had met the immovable object of the Wraith host, and found their edge not in technology, but psychic magic. Soulseeker loomed over the front line, his Icaring shield generator casting a pale aegis of light across the leading elements that prevented the worst of the magical storm from taking a greater toll. The Wraithguard, so protected from the Chaos Terminator's salvos, seized the moment, running in close to open fire with the distortion cannons. Howling vortexes of warp energy simply snatched away from their heavily armored targets as if they had been sucked from an open airlock into space. Soulseeker charged through the Thousand Suns ranks, braving salvos of mutagenic fire that would have turned a mortal target inside out, and swept his immense ghost blade across the span of the enemy battle line. The dolorous blow cut several of the Scarab cult in half at the waist, breaking the Thousand Suns' cohesion. Suddenly, the Iyanden wraith blades were in amongst them, fighting with grace and efficiency of movement as their axes hewed apart suits of prosperine battle plate. Tortured by so many arcane forces clashing at once, the crystal bridge shuddered, shook and cracked along its length. Some of the wraith constructs were fast enough to leap from one cracking OE of crystal to another until they reached the safety of the far side. Others were not so lucky and tumbled away into a nameless, fractal oblivion. Others were not so lucky and tumbled away into a nameless, fractal oblivion. Nearby, the demon-choked tunnels of the Psychodelta's rightmost spar were lit brightly with warpam. Cackling pink horrors and flamers drizzled fire with manic glee as they lurched and bounded towards the quarry. Amongst them were towering lords of change, each hurling their own devastating spells at the oncoming Eldar. The Beeltani spearhead that faced the damning host suffered 1,000 deaths in the space of a few terrifying solar minutes. Wherever the mutagenic aims touched an Eldar warrior, manifest insanity was left behind. A squad of howling banshees was turned to infants in outsized armor that looked at the blades in fascination. A trio of winged swooping hawks was transformed into a scintillating rain of scaled serpents. A shrine of dire avengers, having released a hurricane of razored shuriken, found the projectiles reversing course to attack them with the avidity of starving piranhas. Each inventive demise brought great merriment to the horrors that massed around the Lords of Change. For a while, the webway echoed with skirling hilarity. The laughter stopped when figures of legend strode forth, brought together once more by the mighty Jane Tsar. Majestic as the war god Ken himself, the Phoenix Lords emerged from the darkness of the webway one by one. It was not a sermon at the fore, but his foremost student, she who had taken Ynnead into herself, and found her way back to the Reborn. Bafareth dived low, blinding beams searing from his multi-barreled Re'e to burn the eyes from a Lord of Change as he passed. His sword took its head with contemptuous ease as he shot past in a sapphire blur. Faced with a horde of assailants, Jane's span polearm blade carving a deadly spiral around her. Her Triskele shot outward, it cleaved pink-skinned demons in twain on the way out, then slashed through the blue-skinned replicas on the way back as it returned to her hand. The brimstone horrors that scattered the ground in the place shrieked at the sight of Fugant the burning lance, striding swathed in the heat of 1,000 fiery deaths. They ran back howling to set fires amongst the 1,000 suns that came behind. Hissing in impatience, the Lord of Change Zarzab the Ineffable strode forward to bathe Fugan in warp fire, but its mutagenic curse could not touch the Phoenix Lord's scaled armor. A moment later he blasted the creature into discorporating mist with a pinpoint beam from his firepike. A sermon ran a beaked herald of Zinch through with the blade of Asur, hoisting its wriggling body high so his dire avenger acolytes could shred it to nothingness with shuriken fire. Maugan Rai, standing legs braced atop a fallen wraith knight, methodically shot every blade-winged screamer from the sky with such impeccable skill that not a single one of the Morgata's shuriken failed to hit its mark. His bio-explosive rounds he saved for the burning chariots trailing through the skies, each turned to a fiery meteor as they were sent crackling into the hordes below. The greater demon Vexwing teleported into being behind him, stave raised to lay him low. Before the blow could land, Karandras struck from below, melting from the shadows to hack the avian horror into shimmering nothingness with biting blade and scorpion's claw. The Phoenix Lord's skill at arms outmatched the demon host to such a degree that not one of the horrors or their am-hurling, bestial brethren could lay a single claw upon him. Here, amongst the tight press of battle, the first ex-archers were lethality personified. In the next spar, at the foremost tip of the Ynnead advance, the warriors of Ulthwé raced to close quarters with the tightly packed Rubrique. The Black Guardians had felt the sting of the 1,000 suns in ensorcelled fusillades before. They knew from experience that a single inferno bolt could blast an Eldar limb from limb. Yet they faltered not, for they knew the God of the Dead was watching over them. In rushing the enemy lines they invited decimation, and indeed many irreplaceable lives were lost. It would likely have been a massacre but for the presence of Eldrad Ulthron. The High Farseer cast the runes of war to lend uncanny fortune to his kin, whilst his close ally, Kaisadurus the Anchorite, sent storms of crackling lightning within the ranks of the 1,000 suns to disrupt the firing lines. Ahriman parted the sea of his warriors with a wall of psychic force before replying with his own volley of psychic magic. Transmutive aims struck out, turning the elder Farseer Kaisadurus into a crude wooden statue that was caught eternally in a pose of desperate anguish. With the Ulthorns came the mask of the Midnight Sorrow, their shadow seer casting a veil of mist over the dire avengers that sprinted alongside them. Where a volley of blazing bolts roared in, the mist saw the fiery bolts pass through the aspect warriors as if they were made of no more than a shadow. The blitzing attack had gained the Ulthwé war host a good deal of ground, however. As their Harlequin allies zipped and danced through the air around them, the Eldar hit the 1,000 Suns line like a bladed tornado. The armored automata suddenly found themselves hard-pressed. The heirloom blades and energized swords of the Reborn slashed open ancient power armor at the waist, the shoulder, and the neck, each blow aimed with pinpoint precision to ensure as telling a cut as possible. The tactic worked well, and for a triumphant few solar seconds, the Eldar advanced over dismembered suits of battle plate that lay gently steaming in the mist. Then Ahriman pointed his staff, and geysers of pink fire roared out to consume the Harlequins vaulting towards him. 3 graceful warrior dances were caught mid-leap, they landed as scatterings of dust. At the same time, the ranks of beleaguered Thousand Sons seemed to wake from the dream-like torpor and attack with sudden speed, shoulder barging, punching and clubbing the Eldar to the ground with the stocks of the bolters before stamping down to mangle flesh and crush bone. In a crackle of warp-light, Eldrad materialized amongst the Thousand Sons, the glowing staff of Ulthama spinning to shatter their armor as if their ancient battle plate were made of no more than fine china. The fight in the tunnel descended into anarchy around him as the Ulthworms pressed in again and again, their morbid blackened bone armor lit by the neon-bright, mind-searing hues of the raging psychic battle. In anarchy and mayhem, the forces of Tzeentch thrived. Riding upon etheric winds came the exiles, gathered over the millennia to Ahriman's side. 9 was their number, each a sorcerer of incredible power who had, alongside their master, transformed the Thousand Sons to their unliving state. Some strode through the air itself, footsteps blazing in their way, others came on bladed discs that soared through the air, or rode fiery chariots pulled by swift sky-ray demons. The triumvirate of Ynnead had been sighted on the front line, and the psychic signal had been sent. The Reborn were fighting hard to break through the Thousand Sons' ambush with Yvraine at their head. It was time to close the trap. The bird-headed Aztar man Utek stretched his feathered fingers into claws, grabbing and ripping the air. 50 meters distant, incubi blades men were torn bodily apart by invisible forces. The skull-mantled biomancer, narrator of the broken troth, stunned a knot of Eldar with a blast of kaleidoscopic light before casting knucklebones at the feet like a farmer scattering grain. Each osseous seed grew swiftly into a eshless corpse, the unliving warriors clattering forward to lock bony fingers around the limbs of the nearest Eldar. Ahriman himself tied an invisible noose and pulled it taut, a score of those Eldar closest to him clutching at the throats as all breath was sucked from the bodies. Each new spell took a terrible toll. Here, so close to the warp from which they drew the power, the millennia-old sorcerers of the Thousand Sons could mold reality to the desires with the twitch of a finger. Towards them came Yvraine, her face twisted in a snarl. Her proud strut turned into a purposeful run, her expression that of a lioness who has seen her cubs cut down by a cruel assailant. Carver, the Sword of Sorrows, sang at her side, the edge of its blade glowing white with psychic corposant. With her came the Visage, his own chronosword held poised to strike, and the Incarn, howling with the voice of 1,000 departed souls. Empowered by the psychic energies of death all around them, they moved faster than any mortal creatures should. Whispering potent curses, Yvraine cut the air with her fan, and 6 scalpel-sharp dirks EW on deathly winds to impale a chanting sorcerer. Another found his spell cut short as the Visage ran in, closed the Sword of Silent Screams, casting a pall of soundless twilight around him as the great blade sheared off the front half of the exile's helmet, and bisected his head with it. Nearby, the Incarn rose high like a bird of prey on a hot thermal, only to swoop down forcefully. The quicksilver Sword of Souls owed to become 2 daggers that slashed and stabbed at the Thousand Sons, each striking with a demigod strength behind them. A circle of rubricae turned the guns on the creature, but although their explosive salvo tore bloodless chunks from the Incarn's torso, they could not shift the cruel smile from its face. A spiraling vortex of spiritual energy whirled out from the creature's opening maw, and the Thousand Sons froze like statues. The mystical animating forces within the undead traitor marines had been reduced to nothing more dangerous than echoes. Yvraine felt her hatred flare hot, her Gyrinx growling at her side. There was their leader, commanding the throng from his perch on a disk of fiery metal. Casting aside her finery, she shot towards him like a living missile, her companions close on her heels. Calmly putting his staff aside, the champion of Tzeentch cupped his hands as if trapping a winged insect and hurled a handful of nothingness upwards with a roar. Along with the Visage and the Incarn, Yvraine suddenly found herself adrift, not within the webway, but without. They were stranded in a near-silent limbo, trapped on the top of the psycho-crystal walls. The sounds of battle were muffled beneath them, and the cool void sucked in its breath at the backs. Yvraine did not look around, for she felt something there, in the darkness. A voice in her mind said should she do so, she would behold the Changer of the Ways himself, and learn the meaning of madness. That voice was not Eldar, but human. It belonged not to a salvaged soul, but to the arch-sorcerer below. Another joined it, that of Eliarok the Sage, one of the Eldar spirit passengers within her. She had studied this one at length. A hush of insight struck Yvraine. Arzikaranman. She shouted, I have that which you seek. I can restore your brethren. A stone's throw away, the Visage cut at the webway's exterior with the sword of silent screams, but he could not scratch it. The Incarn hissed in pain to her ankh, trailers of purple mist unwinding from its body as it was dissolved by the ether behind. And why should I believe that? Came the sorceress voice in Yvraine's head. You have no power here, in my new domain. She felt white heat as something loomed behind, the fell gaze of godly eyes burning down upon her with terrible, inhuman focus. Open your eyes, she cried, secretly praying to Ynnead that her desperate gambit would work. She pressed her hands upon the psycho-crystal of the webway's exterior, focused on the armored legionaries within, and reversed the cycles of their existence. A dozen of the 1,000 Suns rubric marines, previously leveling firepower into the Reborn with the emotionless efficiency of automatons, staggered backward as if struck. They looked at one another, clutched their hearts, and fell back, rallying around Ahriman before taking up the defensive stances of the Emperor of Mankind's ancient Legionus Astartes. Yvraine could just make out their words as they frantically sought to make sense of the situation. Arzik. Is that you, brother? Where are the Athenians? These are Eldar we face this day. In the name of Magnus, what is going on? Ahriman shook his head as if stunned, his wide shoulders shaking uncontrollably with mirth, grief, or a mixture of the two. He brought his cupped hands together once more and yanked Ynnead's luminaries downward with a shout of pure exultation. A lurch of the stomach, and Yvraine suddenly found herself in the swelling tide of battle once more, the Visage and the Incarn quickly taking up positions behind her. Do it, she said to her companions, siphoning the rich reservoir of Eldar life force that ooded the tunnels into a single burst of invigorating energy. In Ash, the Iyanden giant soul-seeker was there, trailing white lamb as his wraith blade carved a chasm through the crystal of the webway's superstructure with an ear-splitting scream. Stepping to the edge of the fissure, the Incarn opened its maw impossibly wide. It inhaled so mightily the resurrected 1,000 suns were drawn towards it, stumbling over the edge of the chasm to fall away into the void beneath. Ahriman screamed in denial, riding his disc after them on a trail of fire. The Whispering God gives new life, said Yvraine as her Reborn surged forward around her for the kill, just as he takes life away.